Well, my guest today is Peadar TÓiBÍN, who, as you probably know, is a TD and the leader of the Aontu party in the Dáil and in Ireland generally, I guess. I was going to say the Republic of Ireland, but Ireland generally. Thank you for agreeing to talk to us, Peadar, about this important subject. You're from County Meath. Were you born and reared there? And was the border something that was in your consciousness from the beginning?
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Navan, County Meath, and actually my father's family goes back about five or six generations, anyways, in Meath. My mother was from Westmeath. We were a mixed family in terms of politics. My father would have been kind of, let's say, pragmatic Fianna Fáil, and my mother would have been kind of farmer Fine Gael background.
Hmm.
So there wasn't a overtly political, a party political atmosphere in my youth, but I suppose, I was raised in the backdrop of the 80s and the 90s. And one of my first political memories is the hunger strikes.
Hmm.
I my family, would have actually had a lot of the what I would call the black propaganda at the time. So I asked my mother, I was only about 6 or 7 or 8 years old, why were these people ending their lives in such a manner? And she used to tell me that, well, if they didn't, the IRA would kill their families outside of the prisons. And that was some of the propaganda that was being pushed around at the time. But obviously, the images of these funerals happening were enormously impactful at the time. So I decided to get to know more about it. And I remember one of the first books that I got from the library was Tim Coogan's book, The IRA, when I
Hmm.
was about
Hmm.
12 years old. And then around when I was about 14, the Loughgall volunteers were killed
Yeah.
by the SAS. So I grew up at a time where, pretty much every second day there was another shocking killing happening or a shocking event happening
On the other side of the border.
in the other side of the border. And to be honest, Meath, Navan isn't that far away. So like it's only an hour to South Armagh or to Newry from Navan. And,
Hmm.
I would have been in and out of it. Also, believe it or not, Navan is interesting in that there was a lot of housing estates, small housing estates, and even the area where I live now, that were built in the 70s. And maybe out of every 10 houses, five or six of them would have been people from the north of Ireland. So the house I'm sitting in now was a house built by a fella from Coal Island
Hmm.
in Tyrone, and
Hmm.
the neighbour's house would have been from Belfast, and so there was definitely a mixing of people around that time
Uh-huh.
too, given that a lot of people were fleeing the north of
Yeah.
Ireland during the height.
Well, what advantages or disadvantages do you see the border as having at present?
Well, the border is an advantage for criminals. It's a competitive advantage. So basically, the border means that if there is a crime happening, that the Gardaí have to stop at the border and vice versa. So the border has always kind of provided that shelter, if you like, for crime and antisocial behaviour. Unfortunately, over the years, disadvantage wise, obviously, the bigger that an internal market is economically, the more opportunity there is for businesses. So the border, if you like, is what I would call is a barrier to people doing business and for enterprise as well in terms of development. In many ways, a lot of the areas along the border became kind of how would you say it, remote areas because the border was that barrier. So if the border hadn't been there, they wouldn't have been remote. They would have had big hinterlands and big access to
Hmm.
markets. So there's been an economic problem in terms of that. Also, the border has created a situation whereby you've had to duplicate an awful lot of civil service and public service roles across the country. So practically everything that exists in a public service or a civil service basis is duplicated with all the costs that go to that. And we have two health services, to education systems. If you go abroad, we have Invest NI, and we have Enterprise Ireland and the IDA. We've actually got three tourism bodies on the island of Ireland at the moment. So there's all of that difficulty, and as well, I would have people often ask me, why is the southern economy so much further ahead probably than the northern economy at the moment? And my instinct in that is that self determination is a key element of economic development. And I think that the leaders of republicanism in the late 19th century realized that after the famine, that if you leave decision making to a foreign power, that foreign power will not make decisions for your benefit. And there actually is an existential cost potentially in that. And that's, I think, what really drove the desire for independence probably in the late 19th century, in the early 20th century in the south of Ireland. And even now, Britain is governed by a London home counties, establishment. And, Wales and Scotland and even Northern England, and especially the north of Ireland, it doesn't do well because it doesn't really have control over its own self-determination. So,
Okay.
the people of Dungannon are just as clever as the people of Monaghan. The people of Newry are just as hardworking as the people of Dundalk. The people of Derry are just as entrepreneurial as the people of Letterkenny. The only probably difference between those two economic zones is in the southern zone, there is people make their own decisions about their own economic opportunities.
Yeah.
In the north, it's not, and the north has never been of interest to the home
Yeah.
counties in
Right.
terms of economic development, and that's why I think that actually Irish unity would be larger than the sum of its parts economically.
Okay. So from that, I take it that one of the central tenets of the Good Friday Agreement, the notion of a border poll, is something you'd see as desirable. Would you see it as inevitable?
It's funny. The political situation internationally is so random in many ways and so unstable that I don't think it's you can say for sure that things are inevitable. I think that there are a number of significant ingredients into the processes which are significantly moving in favor of Irish unity. There is no doubt about that. I think obviously the first one is obviously the issue of demographics. And if you look, I think even the Irish News had, and some of the other papers had border poll information on polls that came out recently. And I think the 18 to 35 demographic showed that 50% of that demographic would vote for Irish unity if there was a poll tomorrow, while about only 42% would vote to remain within the UK if there was a poll tomorrow. And there's no doubt there is a demographic basis there towards Irish unity. And I've no doubt as well that, the Brexit and the instinct of the London government has destabilized a significant chunk of unionism too. While a lot of unionists would have seen the union as an economic advantage, and also as maybe a social advantage, depending on what their social outlook was. But increasingly, it's clear that the relationship with London is an economic disadvantage. And actually, Britain is becoming more insular in terms of its development. And as a result, many within the unionist community would be of the view, I think, that they are less loyal because of maybe some of their loyalty maybe would have been to the half crown rather than the crown. And that there's a little bit of destabilization there at the moment.
So, to get down to brass tacks, who, if anyone, needs to do what, if anything, in relation to the border? I mean, say, inside the next year.
Yeah, so Aontu is what I would call a practical Republican political party. And what I mean by that is we see the border as a wall with 1,000 blocks. Okay, each of those individual blocks stands for an item of service or the system north or south. So one block might be a cross-border air ambulance. Another block might be a cross-border cancer service. Another block might be a curriculum content creating for let's say Gael schools north and south. So we have loads of these blocks of barrier to whereby if we took the individual block down, it would provide a better service north and south, a more efficient service north and south. And it wouldn't be necessarily a threat to anybody's constitutional space. And I think right now that the governments north and south have been very slow and actually looking at taking each of those individual blocks down. So I think that the southern government and the administration in the north of Ireland can actually should start to equalize systems in the north, like even spatial developments north and south. And I think this is a prime example of how the border has cost people. So, the border, when the university system was being built in the north of Ireland, rather than put the university in the north, properly in the northwest in Derry, the university was located in Coleraine. When you see the motorway being built, it doesn't go north south to the two big urban areas on the island. It goes to the southwest towards Dungannon. And even when it does, the dual carriageway does come to Newry, rather than keep going for Dundalk, it actually turns left to Warren Point, which is a beautiful seaside village in County Down. But it's, it shows you the distortion that the border creates in terms of spatial delivery. So, like, what I would be saying, like, a few years ago, probably around 2016, I was the author of the first Oireachtas report on the All Ireland economy. And in that report, I interviewed about 100 different people from all different political backgrounds, religious backgrounds, etc. People from farming, health, from the unions, from the employers, right across a different spectrum. And what everybody agreed was that if we plan together, fund together, and deliver services together, they'll simply be better services, they'll improve people's lives better, and they'll be more cost effective. So I think right now, both administrations, north-south, should start that. And the idea that if we do that right across the gamut of that wall of all of those different aspects that are affecting people, every time we take down a block from that wall, the border gets lower. And on that sunny day when there is Irish unity, it's far easier to make that transition because actually the island of Ireland has equalized in so many ways so that it isn't as big a step and probably isn't as a scary step, especially for unionists.
Yeah. Many people compare the notion of a border poll with Brexit. And as we know, Brexit was a disaster because nobody knew what the word meant, really. Just the idea of breaking free from the EU and independence in some sort of vague way. And I think most people are very keen to avoid the same kind of thing happening. So they're saying, what we need is models. What are you talking about when you say you want a united Ireland or you don't want a united Ireland? Do you think would a vehicle like a citizens' assembly be a helpful organization of people to begin to build a structure, or at least a suggested structure for a united Ireland?
Yeah, so I've spoken to Sinn Féin on this, and Sinn Féin, I think, are kind of very supportive of the idea of a citizens' assembly. To be honest, it's too weak of an idea, and I've actually spoken to ambassadors and different people in senior civil service positions. It wouldn't have the capacity or structures to be able to deal with something as significant as this. So what Aontu has suggested is that we have a new Ireland forum. You remember back in the day, Gareth Fitzgerald's government created a new Ireland forum at the time to try and bring in everybody on the island of Ireland into a space where we could have a discussion. So I think at this stage, we do need a new Ireland forum where political and civic society are invited into a forum in which everybody can discuss how we proceed towards, first of all, reducing the height of that wall, taking down all of those individual bricks, and hopefully then going beyond and saying, well, actually, if there was Irish unity, this would be what we would need. This is how we would have to develop it. These are the steps that we would have to take. These are the investments that would have to happen, etc. Now, you might ask me, well, unionists are not going to play a part in that. And I would say, well, first of all, if you look at the vote in the north of Ireland, a lot of the soft unionist vote actually now votes for the alliance. And if you look at the alliance transfers, those transfers often go to other parties who support unity. So there is a block of already soft unionism, if you like, that is already voting in a manner in which it could at least engage on these issues. And remember, we don't have to convince all of unionism, and indeed, we'll never convince every single unionist of the merits of Irish unity. But I do think that we have an opportunity to convince enough unionists to ensure that the next step will be a cohesive step. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not one of these individuals that is looking to change the Good Friday Agreement. The Good Friday Agreement says when there's a majority, there should be Irish unity. And I believe that should be the case. We can't, right now the union is dependent on a majority. We cannot change the goalposts for Irish unity. It has to be under the same basis in which the union exists. But yeah, so that's what I would do. And currently there is in the last Dáil, I was a member of the Good Friday Agreement Committee Implementation Committee, and in fairness, in that committee we had alliance members that were in attendance. But Aontu have put forward a bill in the Dáil which would give speaking rights to Northern MPs in the Dáil and on Oireachtas committees. They wouldn't have voting rights under our bill because that might be a step too far for the political establishment down south currently. But even just having Northern MPs speaking in the Dáil, I think, would be a big step forward. And we've put forward a bill which would give voting rights to Northern citizens in terms of presidential elections. The third element, Jude, I just want to suggest here, which is a very, very important element, is there is a resistance amongst some southern political parties to Irish unity. And that is basically because many would see Irish unity as a threat to their own political parties. So, for example, Fianna Fáil is a party that takes about 20%, 21% of the vote in the south of Ireland. If there was a United Ireland now, Fianna Fáil would fall to a party of maybe about 12%. The same with Fine Gael would fall to about, 8, maybe 10 to 15% in that bracket, which would make government far harder for them to achieve. They would become a party on the sidelines. So one of the big jobs we have to do is to get those political parties to form on an all-Ireland basis. And, having Cumann, having branches, having members, having councillors, having elected reps in the north would, first of all, get over that potential pitfall for those parties in terms of Irish unity. But also, we're an all-Ireland party. We have lots of members in the north of Ireland, and, they impact on us in terms of how we develop policy, the steps we take. We hear their views. If we do something that they don't like, they tell us. And if we do something that if we're not doing something we should be doing, they tell us as well. So we do have to get the other political parties to join in an all-Ireland fashion. Now, how that's going to be done is going to be a hard question. I think the SDLP have a role on that. However, Claire Hanna has obviously shown herself to oppose that particular alliance with Fianna Fáil in the past.
Yeah. All of those things seem to me very desirable and would, in fact, make the notion of coming together more feasible. But I still would feel that is there not something more structured? Somebody, for example, you said in your New Ireland Forum, there would be politicians and there'd be civic society. But who's going to call that New Ireland Forum? New Ireland Forum?
I think the Southern government has to create that New All-Ireland Forum.
And will they?
It has to.
Will they? Would they do it, as you've just said? For both of the big parties, it wouldn't be a death knell, but it certainly would be a wound if you had a United Ireland eventually. So will they not drag their heels as long as they can?
Yeah, I think there's going to be an instinct in those parties to drag their heels, and there's different dynamics going on. Interestingly enough, Leo Varadkar was more pro United Ireland, I think, than Simon Harris, and also Micheál Martin's leadership of Fianna Fáil has diluted the All-Ireland instinct within Fianna Fáil over the last while. I do think that Fianna Fáil, with a different type of leader, could potentially be positively disposed to it. Remember, people like Eamon O'Keefe and Mark Daly, for example, there would be significant United Irelanders there. Now, I suppose to a certain extent, one of the reasons why this has taken a little bit of a step back recently is the fall of the Sinn Féin vote as well. Sinn Féin's vote fell pretty drastically over the European, local and general elections last year in the south. The reason being, I think, is that Sinn Féin became, if you like, rather than a broad church towards building Irish unity, became very much distracted by the culture wars, distracted by the, socially hard left kind of politics. They became detached from their membership and their support base on a range of different issues and lost a lot of support as a result. So I do think Sinn Féin have to smarten up in terms of making sure that they don't become this kind of detached elite away from their supporters. And the second thing is there is a possibility this government may not go to 5 years; it could go 3 years. I would say, there is a possibility of a potential government, maybe Fianna Fáil, Sinn Féin, into in the future, who I think you could see a potential for the political will to achieve something like a New Ireland forum
So
happening in relation to that.
are you suggesting that a New Ireland forum would have to wait for a change of government?
Yeah, I don't see the political will for a New Ireland forum in the current government. Now, Micheál Martin has created this shared Ireland element within his own
Mm.
department. And I will say that the shared Ireland element is probably a gentle step forward in relation to All Ireland relationship building. But it is a tentative step rather than a purposeful step. And I think, we need to get beyond that tentative step now. I think really what the government should be looking at is a potential referendum in 2030. I would subscribe to the Ireland's futures objective of a referendum on Irish
Is
unity.
that realistic? Is that realistic,
Right.
you think?
Well, I think it's because of the Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael government in power. It's probably not realistic at the moment. But I do like I'm not involved in politics because I expect the status quo to pertain. I'm involved in politics because I'm an optimist, and I hope that there will be change in relation to these issues. Um, I give it like I was frustrated during the elections as well because the 2030 date was in my mind. Before the elections, Sinn Féin went to the polls in the south, and they asked people to transfer to People Before Profit and to the Soc Dems. Neither party, which really campaigns really on the issue of Irish unity, they didn't obviously want people to transfer to Aontu. And even after the elections, Sinn Féin only started discussions about creating a government with the likes of Labour, Soc Dems, and People Before Profit. And again, Aontu wasn't, a choice for Sinn Féin, the leadership at that time. I wonder how high on the agenda is Irish unity amongst the southern end of Sinn Féin at the moment, and when in terms of voting packs or in terms of negotiation for government, they don't seem to use that as a reason to negotiate with other political parties, unfortunately. But I do think as well, like political parties have a job of campaigning on the issue. We aim to have a meeting in the north of Ireland over the next month, which will be on building Irish unity. It'll be about bringing our own internal membership together to start our own campaign on that issue in the north over the next 2
But
or 3
you
years.
still feel that we'll have to wait for a change of government?
Yeah, there's no appetite, I think, currently amongst Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil to go down the route of a New Ireland forum.
And you don't think that civic nationalism in the form of a New Ireland it would be sufficient to pressure or convince the British Secretary of State of the need for a border poll?
First of all, I do think that there has like the civic nationalism has done a great job over the last 5 years in taking this campaign and broadening it out rather than it just being a singular individual political party. And I do think that you have a far better chance of achieving this under a Labour government in London than you would have under a Conservative government. There's no doubt about that. But I still think there's a job of work in trying to make sure that there's more energy coming from the south on this. And in the south, the issues over the last number of years have been housing, they have been migration, they have been the cost of living crisis. There are the issues that are grabbing people currently, and the parties of Irish unity need to do more in terms of educating and popularizing the objective as well.
So you think I can run parallel with these bread and butter issues that you've spoken of?
I do, and I actually I do believe that that Irish unity is an issue of Irish national interest, and on a range of different issues, it is important for us to keep really reinforcing this. That the idea that a London government should have a say over what's happening. And even let's say on the issue of immigration, which has become a bigger issue in the south in recent years, we made the call that we need an Irish sea border. So on that issue, we believe that if a person is fleeing war and violence, we should do the right thing and try to help those individuals.
mm,
But obviously, we need to be able to control the borders to be able to manage the system.
mm.
You can't control the borders when obviously there isn't an Irish sea border in terms of the movement of people, because then people can move pretty much between the north and the south
Ah,
and Britain, at ease.
mm, mm,
So we introduced the logic of an Irish sea border into that debate.
mm,
And again, we were disappointed that that opportunity wasn't taken by Sinn Féin to do that.
mm.
And in actual fact, in those debates, and I don't want to make this discussion about Sinn Féin, but in those debates, Sinn Féin actually agreed that they would like to see more checks along the border between North and South in
Mhm,
terms of the movement of people,
mm.
which we found very strange because
Yeah,
that's in
I think-
contradiction
yeah.
to the whole idea of
Uh-huh.
United Ireland as well.
Well, the Good Friday Agreement says that it's got to be a British Secretary of State who will call for a poll, and he or she will only do that when they believe that it can be won. Does that seem to you a desirable state of affairs? And is the British Secretary of State just another word for the British government, a kind of a front man?
Yeah, so like we supported the Good Friday Agreement and we supported the peace that came from it. But the Good Friday Agreement has mistakes in it. There's no doubt about that. And we believe that the Good Friday Agreement should be reformed in a number of different directions. So, for example, the fact that the DUP or Sinn Féin can collapse Stormont, is a perennial problem that's going to just continuously cause damage to the body politic and to the administrative abilities in the north. But we also believe it's a serious mistake in leaving that in the hands of the Secretary of State for the North of Ireland. It is simply then saying that the British can decide anytime they like. They can make a determination of whether or not there's a decision. And of course, British governments are going to do what British governments feel is in the interest
Mm.
of their own
Would,
objectives.
would,
And
would-
I can't see, to be honest, that many examples. It would have to be overwhelmingly conclusive that a poll is going to be successful for any British Secretary of State to pull the trigger on that decision. They're not going to make that decision in any manner unless they feel that they have no choice but to make
uh-huh.
that decision.
Well, what would
So I
make
do
them
think
feel they had no choice?
the only way you could prove that obviously would be continuous growth of nationalist and republican votes in the north of Ireland, and opinion polls clearly stating that the vast majority of people north and south wanted Irish unity. And even that puts to a certain extent the threshold too high in reality. I think that we do need to get to a situation where that decision is out of the hands of the Secretary of State and into the hands of an international independent adjudicator of some sort,
Hmm.
maybe the
I think
UN.
you've touched on this already, but I'd just like to come back to it. And that is, there are those who speak about the need for reconciliation in the North, particularly before you would go to a border poll. There are others who say that, you create a border poll, but you make it clear what kind of Ireland you're proposing, and that then unionists can decide. And they'll be encouraged to decide by the very fact that there is a structure available for them. What's your own thinking on that? Do you think reconciliation should come first, or?
Yeah, well, I'm going to ask your last point first, if I can. So, first of all, I often hear debates going, especially from the Republicans, not just Irish unity we want, but it's this type of Ireland we want, etc. And we don't support Irish unity unless nearly it's this type of Ireland that we get. And actually, that's rubbish, to be honest. To be honest, whatever type of Irish unity that exists, it will be dependent upon the majority will of the people on the other side of Irish unity. You cannot go in and say that we're creating an Irish unity that's set in stone, etc. Now, you can obviously draw out how the practicalities will
Hmm.
function. So how you could have a situation where, for example, Stormont remains for 25 years, but under a nine-county Ulster vote to give unionists maybe some more direct say. I'm a big fan, to be honest, of regional assemblies and wouldn't have
Hmm.
a problem with actual provincial assemblies because the southern state is extremely centralized.
Hmm.
So you could put in those kind of elements to give northern unionists a little bit more confidence. You could say that maybe that the six counties would remain as part of a commonwealth for a period of time, while in an Irish unified state, for example. So there are some of the things that you could try to work out in advance. But the reality is the unified state will be a reflection of the democratic will of the people on the other side of Irish unity. And that's a really important thing to say. In terms of reconciliation, like we have been really struck by the amount of people from the Protestant and Unionist community that have said to us that they could never discuss unity with Sinn Féin, but they could discuss it with themselves. And you know, we have been really taken by that. And it's interesting, we would often have a stand in the Ulster show, the agricultural show in the north of Ireland on an annual basis. And easily 50% of the people who come to the Aontu stall are from a Protestant and Unionist background. And that would be because many of those people would see that we actually reflect a lot of their social values too, in terms of we would have a lot in common with their social outlook as well. So I actually think that's, you know, we've done a job of work in terms of reaching out to Protestant communities and Unionist communities to try and find common ground with them. And a lot of our local area reps do the same. But I will say this, there is a mistake made on what reconciliation means. And people, for some reason, have it in their minds that reconciliation means that we dress up in each other's political clothes. So that, in other words, I go to the Battle of the Somme commemoration, or that I go to the July 12th march, etc., and the Unionist therefore has to go to the Easter 1916 event, etc. That's not the case. Reconciliation is based on the idea of pluralism, and we support pluralism. We're of that wolf tone objective that we support an Ireland of Catholic, Protestant, and dissenter. And pluralism means that everybody can be who they are to the full extent without fear or favor of the state. But there are actual plural identities. There's a kind of a feeling that reconciliation means that we have to meld into this kind of hybrid identity where we all accept each other's cultural values and attend each other's cultural events. But actually, the real idea of reconciliation is that I can have a good, strong working friendship, a productive relationship with my Unionist brother, and still be fully Republican, and he can still be fully British and Unionist in his expression as well. And that's, I think, we have to actually get around to the idea that we don't have to dress up in each other's political clothes to reconcile.
Yeah,
Far from it, we can be who we are fully and still reconcile.
You've touched on something that many unionists would say, that the Republicans talk about, oh yes, there'd be a respected place for unionists as British citizens in a united Ireland, but they say that that's just a contradiction in terms. That if I'm a unionist and you take me out of the UK because the majority want it that way, I'm no longer a unionist. I'm now something else, and that's why they're so resistant to the notion of change.
I think in terms of, you look at countries that are successfully pluralist, you would often see, you know, whereby they would be, you know, in America, for example, you would have Italian Americans, you would have Irish Americans, you would have German Americans, you know, you would have people who have the common attribute of American, but also a key element of their identity is their heritage identity. And, you know, I think that if we're looking to create what I would call cohesion in a new Ireland, the best way to, you know, to accept that cohesion is not to force our cultural heritage on anybody else, but to say there are plural cultural heritages that make up this state, make up this nation. And all of those plural cultural heritages are equally valid and respected within our society. We don't have to pretend to be that individual, but we can respect the fact that that is the best way to function. When I was actually way back when I was a Sinn Féin councillor, there was a historical act that happened in my own town of Navan. So when I was growing up, I heard stories from my father to say there was a guy called Thomas Hodgett, who was a loyalist from Dungannon, who lived in Navan, and he was the postmaster of the town of Navan. And during the Troubles in the 1918, 1921, the British forces in Meath were putting pressure on Thomas Hodgett to reduce the integrity of the post office by letting them spy on posts that was coming in and also on telegraphs that were coming through the Navan post office. He refused to do that because he believed in the integrity of the service and of the workers. And the British Army took him from his bed and marched him up the street, shot him in the head, and threw him into the Boyne. And his body was found about 3 or 4 days later. Now, interestingly, I was working in Armagh, in a firm in Armagh way back when, and on the last day, some of the people who were in that firm were from a unionist background. We all got on very well. We all went out to dinner, and it came up in conversation that one of the people from the unionist background had a member of their family that was killed during the Troubles in the South. I asked, the circumstance. They told me he was a postmaster. I said, was his name Hodges? And they said, yes, that's my granduncle. So I then made it my job to have a small park created in Navan under the name of Thomas Hodges, a plaque there explaining the circumstances of his death. And we invited people from their family to the event. And we had people, I won't mention their names, but they were all the names that are very unionist names, all in attendance at that event. And still to this day, some of those people would contact me in support of the work that I'm doing, even though we came from different political backgrounds. So I think that, it is, I think, always a possibility where you can find commonality in terms of values and then work with people with different identities. And then in those situations, you can actually build a cohesive society. And I think that's what we should do.
We've literally seconds left, Peadar. Final question. Would you put a timeline on this or even make an educated guess as to when it might be a reasonable thing for the British Secretary of State to call a border poll?
I think in terms of demographics in the north of Ireland, I think 2030 is a reasonable time for the British Secretary of State to call a border poll. In terms of the political system in the south, we have a job to do. The people who are on the side of Irish unity. And I would say this is important. We are a generation, who are blessed in many ways. Like dozens of generations have gone past who've struggled so hard to achieve Irish independence and justice and unity and failed and sacrificed so much in achieving that. And here we are on the precipice of it with the potential to do it. And we really need to push politically and work together to achieve that over the next while.